Today, we are going to find out why your soil might be starving, even if it is full of nutrients.
You know, it's not so much dead, it's just so out of balance.
Matthew Slaughter. Welcome back to the Soil Talks podcast. So why would you say that the soil biology is the final frontier of modern agriculture?
The final frontier in the sense that we only have begun to scratch the surface of what is known and what is possible. So there's a lot of things going on that we can't see. The tools that we have are, I would say, are still primitive. They're getting better. They've definitely gotten better over the last 20 years. Because looking at it with a microscope is one step in the process. Then now with all of the genetic sequencing and doing the, trying to understand the functions of all these different microbes and the huge community that is represented by these microbes, that is like, we don't, it is just scratching the surface. So I don't know if it's a final frontier. I don't think there's anything in human minds. There's no such thing as the end to the journey. So it's just the next step in really understanding what's going on with how we manage our soil, our crops, our plants, and ultimately our ecosystems.
Absolutely. I think AI might play a game or a role in that as well, especially with the compounding of data. And we're seeing it already. We're seeing it drastically happen at a pretty rapid pace, which then does give you the ability to look into it a little bit deeper. And but like you said, we've just scratched the surface. It could be the final frontier, but that may be still 100 years away. Or who knows? We really don't know how long it's going to take to really understand it. Well, that's perfect. Let's talk a little bit about the journey into the microscopic world. How did you basically get started in soil biology, if you don't mind?
So, okay. So the history of Matt and soil. So I joined the Soil Food Web Laboratory under Dr. Ingham in 2003. As a database specialist. I was working on helping manage the data flow from the lab, putting it into a usable format. It was a very cumbersome, lot of Excel spreadsheets and reformatting and creating reports and doing all this crazy stuff with the data. And my brother, who's a programmer, and I, with my background in database, relational database management and design, we rebuilt the whole system to manage the lab so that it could basically, instead of 2 full-time people, anybody in the lab could enter data, create reports for the clients. So
Gotcha.
And put it into a format that was really easy to present. And so I came in it from a tech perspective.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's what got you into it.
Yep.
And then you've just been able to take that same tech background, I take it, and build it into your reporting now and the things that you do through Earthfort. I mean, you guys just kept it going, basically.
Yeah. I mean, the system now is essentially the same system that we built 20 years ago, and we just updated it based on software. So
Sure.
So currently it's basically it runs on a mini server in my lab, and that's all I need. But because of that, because I was hired to do data entry and data management, and we created this system, I didn't have a job anymore. So Dr. Ingham and I sat down, and she decided that I would be a good person to teach how to do the consulting side, how to talk to the clients and work with them directly on how to interpret and implement strategies based on the data. And so
Sure.
that was the real beginning of my soil journey itself.
Yeah.
I understood the data better than anybody.
That's interesting. So you really do see it now from the AI perspective too, coming in, I'm sure, and
Yeah,
compiling the data and doing those types of
yeah,
things.
exactly. I mean, that's, working with the spreadsheets, looking at the numbers, trying to understand trends and what what's important, because
Yeah,
we've done a lot of different testing, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, the different categories of microbes, and looking at all of this data. And from my perspective, I take a humanistic approach that says what's the smallest deliverable product that is going to be valuable for a farmer. So in other words, lowest cost and easiest accessibility and easiest to understand. So I've taken the kind of the, I don't know, simple approach, whereas AI is going to create this huge, it's going to take decades and decades for people to wrap their heads around all the data that's being generated by the genomic testing and what the AI.
sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Moving into the future, I would say. So, what was the catalyst, kind of, if you don't mind, for starting Earthfort? Like, what was that catalyst to be like, we're starting this and we're going to move forward?
So what happened is I started going out into the field working with farmers, realizing that they needed certain tools to help them implement the strategies, right? Because a lot of them, even back then, is like, we want to move away from chemicals. We want to stop using herbicides and pesticides to manage our crops. We want to take care of the soil.
Sure.
And the kinds of products that were available at the time, it was really hard to find them sometimes. And there was a lot of, there's a lot of different versions of it. Like this humic acid is an example. There's probably 30 or 40 ways to create a humic acid product, and not all of them are created equal, and not all of them do all of the jobs that we want them to do. So,
Sure.
so Earthfort is actually shortened. It was Earth Fortification Supplies Company was what we started with. And I was talking to Elaine, and I said, look, we need to consolidate and vet out some of these products, right? And say, look, if you're going to use a fish, let's make sure it's a really good fish, and let's test it and make sure that it's doing what it's doing. And if it does do a good job, then maybe we should help sell it, and we can sell it to our clients, and we create a separate entity to keep the lab and the supplies company separate at first. And so, yeah, it was really about, let's go find these good tools that the farmers need that we can help get into their hands, based on what their goals are.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And then and you ended up doing that. You probably brought some products in, did that, and then you went into development, I take it.
Yeah.
Let's move a little bit beyond the NPK thinking. That's a lot of what you said, conventional guys wanting to switch over.
Mm-hmm.
We're still seeing it, and it's starting to happen more and more and more as well, which is a great thing. It really is a great thing. But why is sterile soil essentially a dead production system?
There's a lot. That's a big question. Wow. Okay. Thank you. Very good. Very good. So the soils are. It's not so much that they're dead, because I've never tested a soil that didn't have life in it. So calling it dead soil is maybe a little misleading, but what we see is selection, and function. So the use of chemicals in the soil and over-tilling, overworking the soil, all of these things lead to degradation of soil structure, which reduces habitat for the microbes. Chemicals replace functionality. So the microbes that normally would be fixing and supplying nitrogen don't need to do their job anymore. And so their populations diminish or go away, and it shifts to some other things. And also, as the diversity declines because of these activities, then that sets the stage for pathogens to come in. So the disease-causing organisms are very well suited for living in those types of soils that conventional agriculture creates.
Sure.
So, it's not so much dead, it's just so out of balance, right? It's like, I love the movie Super Size Me, where, the guy ate McDonald's for a year or whatever, 90 days, and just ate McDonald's, and that's all he ate for a long time. And the health problems that cropped up in him in a short period of time from that specific diet, is a direct indication of what's going on in our soils. Is that, these approach is force feeding the plants, and so it just takes away the function of the soil itself.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And like you said, so you've never seen a sterile soil. There's always been something there.
It's always been something. There's a couple of deserts in the world where I'd be really hard pressed to find biology in it unless, you had water. But, but that's the thing, is that, sometimes it's just lack of water that's the lack of life.
Sure.
But, there's, they're not healthy, but there's something there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's look into more so about understanding the soil food web.
Sure.
And this is where we get into the cast of the characters, right? A quick breakdown of the functional groups. Let's go for it. Bacteria versus fungi. Okay. Why does the ratio matter for different types of plants, row crops, say, versus orchards, or whatever you want to do?
Yeah. So the basic understanding is that, and this is controversial. So, take this with a grain of scientific salt, if you will. A lot of people are skeptical on this approach, but the basic idea is that bacteria and fungi have a particular role in the soil. They both have similar functions. The primary one is to break down nutrients that are present in the soil, break down organic matter, and help build soil structure. So those are the primary functions of the bacteria and fungi. And what happens is that in systems that have higher carbon demand, you get more fungi because there tends to be more carbon in the soil, and they need more breakdown of heavy carbon type materials. And so fungi excel at that. And whereas annuals and perennial grasses and things like that, they tend to like more nitrogen, and that leans itself into the bacterial realm. There's also a relationship between the pH of the soil, electrical conductivity. Are you looking at micro aggregation requirements for the plant or macro aggregation? And the bacteria and fungi, work together to create those conditions, and they also work with the plant itself. So, it really is. It just comes down to, what does the plant actually need? What form of nutrients is that plant looking for? And what form of biology is best suited for providing those types of requirements? Even with nitrogen availability, the pH of the soil and the structure of the soil, the oxygen level, the moisture content, and the function of these microbes, it's different forms of nitrogen is being created and released. And a lot of that is, it's all chemistry, but it's also a big part of the role of those microbes themselves in that process.
Absolutely. And that's exactly where exudates are excreted from the plant root systems to farm what it needs, right? Whether it's fungi, bacteria, like they know, as they excrete, the soil gels, acids, things like that back into the soil. Correct. The exudates to feed them. So perfect. Yep. The predators, the role of protozoa and nematodes in cycling nutrients, if you don't mind.
Yep. So that's the next phase of soil building, the microbial community. So bacteria and fungi, for the most part, there's always exceptions, but for the most part, they don't actually feed the plant directly. They're just creating the habitat, collecting nutrients, and then you need the predators to come and eat them. Essentially, protozoa eating, different types of bacteria, protozoa that eat on fungi, nematodes also eating fungi, bacteria, creating these, basically consuming these collectors of nutrients and then releasing those nutrients into the soil.
Sure.
And that's a pretty simple, no tree grows in the forest unless a bear shits on it,
Yeah.
So, it's the, their role, and they play a role in helping keep the system in balance. And when you get a system that's out of balance, their role changes and the functions change, and how they do their job shifts dramatically as well. So.
What about rhizophagy? Have you looked into that much about bacteria actually entering through the roots, things like that?
So similar to mycorrhizal fungi, some of them are parasitic to the plant, some of them are beneficial, and it's just another role. Again, that's part of the ongoing discovery of how deeply embedded the plants and the microbes are with each other.
Sure.
And so especially in grasses, that's a whole field of study, and depending on what you're doing with it, it could be a really great thing, or it could be a horrible thing.
Sure.
Especially with the types of endophytes and things like that are out there, rhizophagy, all of that is, it could be good or bad. It just depends on the circumstances, but it's all part of the natural system.
Absolutely. No matter what. Okay. Biological testing versus chemical testing. Let's get into that. Why a standard chemical test might show plenty of nutrients, but the plant is still starving.
Yeah. So, when you look at nutrient availability, there's a lot of different ways of extracting nutrients out of soil. And
sure.
When you use a harsh chemical extractant, it's like, yeah, that's great. There's plenty of nutrients there, but those are not plant available forms of those nutrients. And those are, definitely, you have to force it. Basically, you have to force the chemistry off of the sand, silt, and clay, or extract it out of the sand, silt, and clay, or, and even with, and so that can demonstrate, a high level of nutrient availability or even excessive nutrients. And the key to the nutrient cycle is the microbes. Plants don't eat because of the nutrients in the soil. Plants eat because of the nutrients in the soil solution made available by the microbes.
Absolutely.
And
bioavailability.
Bioavailability is the key. And so when you're looking at a chemistry report, you have to take into consideration, okay, I've got a vault full of gold, but if I don't have the combination to the lock, I'm not going to get in there and get that gold.
Yes.
And the microbes the biology provides that code to unlock those nutrients.
And if you don't mind, then how does Earthfort's lab services basically, let's say, see
Sure.
What a standard lab lacks?
Yeah, all I do at this point, like I said, I've a minimalist approach. I look at the pH and the EC to make sure that there's nothing out of whack in the chemistry side that would throw the microbes off. pH too high or too low can limit microbial activity, and electrical conductivity is the level of soluble salts in the soil. And if it's too low, then there's nothing free available. And if it's too high, then it's going to limit microbial activity.
Sure.
And then I just look at bacterial and fungal population. Is there enough of these two groups? And then what's the balance relative, to the plant that you're trying to grow? And that's it.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's perfect. So you're basically looking at fungal to bacterial ratios, populations,
Yeah.
those types of things.
Yeah, just the real bare minimum. Like I said, for 20 years I've been looking at the data, and those are the four pieces of data that actually make a difference at the end of the day for most farmers. And
Yeah.
if they correct those elements, it's the experience that we have is that then the soil structure starts to improve. They can then start reducing their inputs, and then the predators will improve, and the whole system will start to work better.
What is the biggest myth people believe about soil microbes?
Well, I think what we're just saying in that the soil microbes, the biggest myth is this: if soil microbes will fix everything, and that's not entirely true.
Sure.
The other thing is that the other big myth that I really like from a farmer's perspective or a grower's perspective who is thinking about going this direction, one of the biggest myths is that all nematodes are not bad. In fact, only a small percentage of nematodes are actually bad. And a lot of farmers have zero tolerance for nematodes, especially in the larger crops, right? In the corn, wheat, soy, nematodes in an unhealthy system, those root-feeding nematodes can be really devastating. But they're only a small fraction of what's out there, and a healthy soil will reduce their population significantly. Also, let's see, most of the disease-causing organisms are WIMPs. So we're throwing a lot of chemicals at dealing with diseases that could more easily be handled with focusing on soil health and improve the health of the soil. And those organisms that are attacking your plants, they're a symptom of an unbalanced, unhealthy system. They're not.
If a grower finds their soil is biologically depleted, where do they start?
That's a good question. It depends on the farmer because there's a lot of angles to take with how to approach it. If you look at the big, like the pasture system, regenerative agricultural approach, they're going to start talking about cover crops, no-till, animal rotations, trying to start to manage the above ground part of it.
Sure.
And try and allow the system to recover on its own, and like stop doing things that are detrimental to the system itself. And in some cases that works pretty well. In other cases, it's only a part of the program. The other part of it is to start introducing. So that's why when I look at the test, when we do a test, I look at, are they deficient in anything? And if you're low, and if you don't have enough fungi or enough bacteria in the system, then you might want to think about adding biology, right? And the best way to do that, the primo way to do it, is a really good quality compost. If you can add a ton or two of compost to an acre of land that has good microbial population, and you stop doing things that mess it up, then that can go a long way to start help rebuild some of those microbes, those populations. Inoculate, basically it's an inoculation. If the compost is not feasible, then turning it into a compost extract or a compost tea is another option. The other way to approach it is to start looking at shifting your fertility program away from synthetic salt-based types of fertilizers and shifting to protein-based fertilizers. So instead of using, urea for your nitrogen source, maybe you go find a good fish and add fish instead of, urea for nitrogen. And the same with, there's all kinds of different organic and or non-salt, non-synthetic types of fertility. I like, soy, alfalfa, fish, those kind of things are great for nitrogen. And you got kelp. And those also act as microbial stimulants as well. So
sure, prebiotics, basically.
Yeah, prebiotics, exactly. And and humic acid is another great tool. And humic acid is probably one of the better options if you get the right kind of humic acid. Not all humic acids are created equal, and humic acid is fun because it does several things that are really valuable, especially in the initial stages of transition. One, a really good humic acid will help neutralize and chelate salts. So if you've been over fertilizing, there's a lot of nutrients locked up in the form of salt in the soil. The humic acid can go in and make those more bioavailable by chelating them. Then it also is a great biostimulant to help encourage the microbes to grow. And then it can also, and through that action, it's a great tool because, fungi really like humic acid. That's one of their, that's the other part of the final frontier because, humic acid creation is still a discussion. I mean, how it is created, formed, and what those processes are in nature. Some people think, some of the research suggests that fungi actually creates humic acid in the process of breaking down the organic matter. And other suggestions that it's purely a chemical process of the breaking down of the organic matter, but becomes a food resource for the fungi. So it's like, well, okay, how can you actually separate those two things? But that's for the scientists to discuss.
I did have one question for you regarding the compost teas. We've never personally dealt with compost teas much just due to the fact that, the biology is kind of unknown, especially if you don't take care of it properly, things like that, you could have issues. Yeah. As you try to scale that, have you seen issues with that, or is it not as big of a deal, or do you know of, or do you use, I should say, even like very specific biological inoculants that are, laid out more as a product, or what do you prefer?
So when it comes to actual inoculation of creating microbes and applying them to the field, there's for a long time, I encourage people to make compost tea. I built and designed brewers to do that, worked on recipes, found really good sources of compost for people or helped them make good compost. And that ultimately is probably the best way. That way it takes away the unknowns. You make your own compost and you're putting it back onto your land. That's the best approach. And liquefying it, scaling, it gets tough. I mean, it's and then that's what we ran into. I mean, my business was going down the path of doing large-scale commercial compost tea production, helping farmers do that. But what we realized was that there was a limit to human power and accessibility and timing, and there's just tons of issues with the logistics, really. And so it didn't scale very well. Extracts scale better because you're not dealing with food resources, you're not dealing with timing issues as much, where you can just liquefy the compost, strain it, and apply it, and you don't need as much, and there's not as much logistics involved, but it's still a lot of water, a lot of work to do that. If you're talking about 1,000-acre farm, that could be a 2-week process every time you want to apply. Most farmers don't have that kind of free time, if you will.
Yeah, that time.
And so,
yeah, sure.
And then And then years ago, from all that learning, I created an actual stable extract product that it was registered, certified organic, that people could buy, and it scaled pretty well. It's still shipping water, but it was microbes coming from one specific area, and it didn't always translate to other parts of the country very well. And so I mean, some of it worked. It's not that it didn't work. It's just that it could have been better. And still, even at only a gallon an acre, when you're dealing with, I worked with a lot of large rangeland stuff, 10,000 gallons of stuff is expensive to ship. It outstripped the benefit. And so I've gone away from microbial inoculants completely and focus more on the probiotics, and then encourage people who need to add or actual probiotics to make their own, or go get some DNA sequencing done and see if there's any specific types of organisms that they need to add to improve their crop. So buying, and there's a lot of companies that sell. I mean, it's easy to get microbes now. I have a supply. I get a supplier in India who will basically, if I give them a name, they'll make it. And so it's not the ideal, because the diversity is more important than an individual organism. But if you really need that individual organism or that function that you might be missing, then it can be very valuable.
What are some of the most dramatic turnarounds you've seen in the field or in turf management? Because you do turf management as well, correct? Or you have worked on turf?
I work with golf courses down in Arizona and on the East Coast, throughout the mountain state. I've worked with all kinds of different things.
Sure.
Dramatic. So I work with a dairy. He's doing corn and grazing for his cows, and he started using our approach, testing the soil, adding compost, adding some prebiotics and things like that. And he was just a small organic dairy, and the results that he got within a year were basically saved the farm. Because what happened, and I don't know if you're familiar, when they sell the milk, they sell it by weight, and you get more. And the higher the milk fat, the more weight it is per gallon, and so you get more money. So we increased his milk fat in just one season by 0.5 percentage point, and then after 2 seasons, I think it went up a full point. And that basically was enough to completely turn the farm around.
That's great.
And it also reduced his need for outside inputs, so he didn't have to buy feed for his cows. From off the farm, he could start managing it. In fact, he's on my list. I'm calling him on Friday to schedule our annual visit.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. So it's at the end of the day, when it all comes down to it, that's exactly what it is. It's like, once you get the system, testing, seeing what's missing, building structure, making sure life's there, making sure energy's there for the life, and just retesting. That's the exact same principles we look at. And it's very simple to do once a farmer or a producer actually wants to do it. Like you said, the amount of money you made for him, and then not only made, but saved.
Saving the farm.
Also, it's both sides of it. So not only did you make more money, you saved money, which is exponential on helping him. So that's always wonderful to hear. Let's talk a little bit about the future of soil science.
Okay.
Regenerative ag trends. Where is the industry heading in the next 10 years, would you say, Matthew?
Well, I hope they're heading in a direction of common sense and critical thinking. Because there's a lot of things going on in the regenerative ag movement that I think people are missing, that they're focusing on carbon credits. They're focusing on like physical practices, and they're not, it doesn't seem like they're paying a lot of attention to actually testing and looking at what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so
Sure.
I'm hopeful that people will start to pay more attention to the bigger picture of why are they moving in this direction, because regenerative agriculture is an interesting concept. But the question becomes, I want people to start thinking about this. If you want a sustainable regenerative system, you can't remove anything from the farm. So if you're harvesting, let's say you're raising cattle, and you pull those cattle off the farm and you butcher them and you sell them, all of that energy is not going back into the farm. So, and the farm itself cannot sustain itself in that fashion, because you've unclosed the closed loop. So if it's a closed loop system, then you could probably create a sustainable regenerative type of system, easy enough for somebody who's got a small garden and is eating and putting all their poop back into the garden, fine. But think about your inputs. Start being be smart about your inputs. And NPK is not something that goes away when you start doing regenerative agriculture. Don't fool yourself into thinking that you can stop fertilizing. You just have to change the way you fertilize and the kinds of tools that you're using and the way that you're doing it. It's just changing. It's a change. It's not, humans are involved in it. It's going to be messed up. So we got to do things to correct it.
That's right. That's right. So you think, though, in the next 10 years, are we going to move more and more towards regenerative systems, though? Is that what you're thinking? Or more and more, I mean, whatever you want to call regenerative or organic, I think, or biological first, whatever.
I mean, it's like, yes, I would really hope that that's the direction, and in some parts of the world, if you look at it from a global scale, most global agricultural systems are already mostly regenerative anyways. As far as that goes, they're not doing the same kind of things that we're doing here in the U.S. And because they can't afford it, right? U.S. is a wealthy, and that's the other thing with, when we're looking at the economy, because that was kind of how we opened the soil economy. If you're constantly putting in $200, $300 worth of inputs to get $200 or $300 worth of outputs, you're not going to get anywhere. You're status quo, you're maintaining, but you're not growing. And so you're forced into a debt relationship where you have to borrow so that you can pay back what you borrowed. And then you can't put braces on your kids, So if you want to actually be profitable, because I think being a farmer would be, if you do it right, it could be the best job in the world.
Very well.
And, but breaking free of the current paradigm is a challenge.
Yep. The treadmill of inputs, right?
Well, and it's more than that. I mean, when you look at the economy, especially large scale ag, you've got corporate industrial farms, large scale family farms that are bound to contracts, and they're tied to, in order to get crop insurance, they have to follow certain parameters and put in place certain guarantees. And if you go to your insurance agent and say, I've decided I'm not going to use weed killer anymore, they're probably not going to sign off on a crop insurance policy for you. So that puts you at risk, and farmers, I found in my travels, farmers are very risk averse. They don't, the fear of losing is way, way stronger than the fear of, than the potential reward of success. So managing, so helping and that's where I see the, potential with the USDA and a lot of these programs that they put into place. Hopefully there'll be more support for farmers to transition so that the reduces the risk, because that's the one thing that's the one thing I've learned over the years is like I can go in and tell them all of these great things about what could happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could double your yield and reduce your costs and have a great, healthy, wonderful environment, but there's also, if you're not honest about it, that could be really too good to be true. So you got to be honest about it. And it's like, yeah, it could not work. And it could take a few years to get there.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like the risk is like, oh, you mean I might actually reduce my yields for a few years in the process. That's bad, or that I'm going to have to change the way I manage my weeds, or I'm going to have to change the way I manage my pests. And, it's so much change. So, hopefully there's support out there. Hopefully we can find more and more ways to help these farmers transition.
Absolutely. And that is one thing, kind of like with the carbon credits, right? That's where a lot of people are starting to say, and I know you mentioned it just a little bit ago, but that was kind of the next thing: climate and carbon, the role of soil biology in carbon sequestration and water retention. So, there are farmers being paid out for carbon credits. I've heard things like that. I don't know. Maybe that helps with the transition that you spoke about. But what is that role of soil biology in carbon sequestration and water retention, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that go hand in hand with that. Is, the biggest way to create a good carbon sink in a soil is to increase the organic matter content. And when you increase the organic matter, that increases the carbon and, puts it into a good balance, because it's not about carbon sequestration. It's about fixing the carbon cycle and maintaining a pool of carbon that's available for the microbes and the plants to cycle through, right? You don't want to just create a carbon sink. That's called coal. That's called oil. Those are true carbon sinks. But for a farm, you want it to be a good carbon system of carbon flow, right? But as you increase the organic matter, if you start reducing the tilling, reducing the chemicals that you put on the field, improve the biological processes, you increase that organic matter. And that organic matter also is what is helping with the microbes, improving soil structure, which improves water holding capacity of the soil, and also the cleaning capacity of the soil. So it brings up a really interesting point, and maybe someday we can talk about this separately, but ultimately for me, this is all about water anyways.
Yes.
Because we got plenty of nutrients and there is biology, but if we don't take care of the water cycle processes, then it won't matter that all of those things are there if there's no water. So, improving water holding capacity, improving water filtration processes through the soil, and reducing or eliminating erosion. Those things you start doing those things, you don't need as much water, and maybe the water that does go on the field might actually make it back into the aquifers and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, and that's important. And I think we're going to see it this year, at least where we're at so far. We're in a high desert and it's not pretty. I mean, we're low on snowpack, low on moisture, even in the valley. Like it's going to be interesting to see. You're going to see the people that have been working on their soils and ones that haven't.
Every time
they're going to struggle.
I see it every time, and I always get, it's always stunning to see some of those things,
It is. And you just are like, man, the guys that are just sitting over there trying to get it irrigated or whatever it looks like, the farmers or producers, or even the turf managers, right? That are trying to figure out how to keep water or enough moisture on their, on the turf.
Yeah.
I mean, it's those types of things. If they're not focused on that and they're only using synthetic inputs, it's, the salts, things like it just dehydrates everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's dehydrating. So let's, if you could, advice for professionals. What is one thing every farmer, landscaper, or gardener should start doing tomorrow to improve their soil biology?
Honestly, it kind of depends on different things, but I would say for homeowner, just stop fertilizing. Just stop putting that crap on the field. And get over this idea that there shouldn't be weeds in your lawn. Quit that, because weeds are just a symptom of a bad soil. And if you start taking care of the soil, the weeds will go away by themselves. You don't need to do stuff. And learn how to make compost. Start actually putting your back into compost production. For golf courses and professional turf systems, boy, that's a whole program. Because you can't ask them to go cold turkey on any of that stuff. All the golf courses that I work on, it's a transitional system. So I would say start educating yourself on options.
Gotcha.
Look at, start evaluating your real problems. What are you fighting? What is the thing that you're fighting for or against?
Mm-hmm.
And start researching that a little bit and start looking for, because the AI these days, if you do an AI search on some of these problems is there a biological or natural or mechanical approach as opposed to a chemical approach, you're going to find some answers, and then vet those out. Don't take it at surface level, vet them out, but use the AI to start the conversation. And then for large scale farms, it's really just starting to analyze the soils, looking at what's going on, what kind of things do you need to start getting into the soil to start working. And again, education is always a good thing to start looking at. How, and ask yourself honestly, do you want to change? And that's the other thing too, is like, it's so easy to walk onto a farm and talk about all these great things, but if they don't want to change or don't feel like they can, they're going to resist it. And so, you got to take a different approach and just ask them to start thinking about it. And
give them some options on testing, things like that. Like at least to see what you got.
Yeah. Testing can be really enlightening if you do it in the right way. And the other part of, and I know we're getting towards the end, but I always make available a few minutes of my time to talk to people who use the testing. That was one of the things that I learned. A lot of testing labs, you send in your sample, you get a report back, and that's it. And like actually talking to somebody about what the report means is like, oh, go talk to your agronomist.
Mm-hmm.
There's not too many agronomists that are trained in soil microbiology. So I always make time for people who want to talk about the report.
That's cool. That's great. I'm going to get into the closing and wrap up now. Rapid fire questions. Favorite microbe?
Naked amoeba.
Yeah. All right. Most influential book on soil?
Boy, I've got a huge library. I couldn't pin it on one. If I would recommend Teaming with Microbes for a beginner.
Teaming with Microbes. Jeff Lowenfels. Yep. All right. He's going to be on here, hopefully here coming just real soon.
You'll have a great time with him.
Yeah. One piece of technology besides a microscope you can't live without?
Your brain.
All right. Where to find you? Where can people find you?
So earthfort.com, easiest way. I do have an Instagram, Earthfort LLC. I'm also on there as Dirt Fixer.
Okay.
I don't do much social media, so take that with a grain of salt. If you want to reach out, just email me, matt@earthfort.com.
Perfect. Yeah, no, and I just want to thank you again. If you would, I guess give us your closing thought also. This is kind of going to wrap it all up on the legacy of healthy soil.
The biggest thing that I think anybody can do is to look at what's going on, ask questions about why do I have a problem? Why am I struggling with certain things? And really, ask those questions and look for yourself, and don't let trends guide you, but actually do research and look at what is going to work best for you, because there's a lot of ideas out there, and not everybody can provide all the answers for everybody, but there are answers out there. So
perfect. Awesome. No, that's perfect. Yeah. And again, I just, to all of our subscribers, people that follow us on YouTube, if you would like, subscribe, share this video out, this podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on, Amazon Music. If you come across our Soil Talks podcast, if you guys would please, like I said, like it, give it a 5-star review, whatever you think. We just like to bring the brightest minds to the front of soil health and to talk and to bring the truth out. And today with Matthew Slaughter, with the owner of Earthfort Labs or Earthfort, we were able to do that. And we were able to get a good look into, into his company. And then not only that, but the way that we look at soil. And we just want to thank you again, Matthew, for taking the time to be on here to share your expertise with our audience. And we look forward to doing some more of them with you in the future.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Appreciate you. You have a great day, Matthew.
You too.